The quiet, peaceful atmosphere of the town was enveloped in the familiar warmth of midsummer. The yards of the houses were lush green and the flowers were vibrantly colourful. Sarah found herself alone at home while her husband, Michael, was away on a business trip. She tried to pass the time scrolling through social media and doing housework. One day around noon she was startled by a strange rushing water sound coming from her neighbour Mr. Carter's house. At first she thought it might be a plumbing issue, but when the sound persisted she started to worry. Mr. Carter was a recently widowed, lonely man living next door. Although they weren't close, Sarah felt compelled to act out of neighbourly concern. Mr. Carter's front door was slightly ajar. This increased Sarah's anxiety. She knocked softly and called out, "Sarah? Mr. Carter, are you all right? Is there a problem?" When there was no response, the sound of water grew louder. All sorts of scenarios ran through her mind. What if he had fallen and fainted? Or what if something else had happened? She suppressed her fear, mustered her courage, and pushed the door open. She walked towards the bathroom, following the sound of running water. The door was cracked open, and steam was drifting into the hallway. Sarah called out again, "Sarah? Mr. Carter?" And at that moment she saw the scene in the bathroom. Mr. Carter was under the shower, his back turned to her. Water was cascading down his shoulders. The steam on the mirror showed a hazy reflection. Sarah froze at the sight. Mortified by accidentally intruding, she didn't know what to do. Just as she was about to retreat, Mr. Carter turned slightly and saw Sarah in the mirror. His eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't seem angry or embarrassed. With a calm expression, he quickly grabbed a towel, wrapped it around his waist, and stepped out of the shower. Sarah stammered, apologizing. "I'm so sorry. I heard the water and thought something was wrong." Mr. Carter replied, "No harm done. I should have locked the door. You were just being kind." "I'll just go," she said, stepping back. As she was about to leave, Mr. Carter spoke gently. "Wait. Thank you for checking on me. It's nice to know someone cares." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind. When she got home, she tried to tell herself it was just a momentary incident, but deep down she knew that something had shifted. The following days were marked by a strange mix of curiosity and unease. She avoided crossing paths with Mr. Carter, too embarrassed to face him. However, the image of him wouldn't leave her mind. It wasn't just his physical appearance, it was his calmness and kindness that affected her. He hadn't been angry, uncomfortable, just understanding. It had deeply shaken Sarah. One afternoon, while she was trimming the bushes in her yard, she was startled by Mr. Carter's voice. "Mr. Carter, looks like you have a green thumb." Mr. Carter was leaning against the fence, smiling at her. Sarah and Mr. Carter were talking by the fence. "Sarah, it's more of a battle than a skill," she replied, laughing lightly. "Mr. Carter, you're doing better than I would. My wife was very talented with these things," said Mr. Carter, his expression softening. "I've let most of her plants go. I couldn't keep up with them." The helplessness in his voice made Sarah pause. "I could help if you want," she said without thinking. And so it began. Sarah would spend hours in Mr. Carter's yard, cutting overgrown bushes and taking care of neglected flowers. Mr. Carter would join her, sharing stories about his late wife and his years as a teacher. His voice was warm and soothing, like a comforting tune that drew her in. At first, everything seemed innocent, two neighbours forming a connection. But sometimes Mr. Carter's gaze would linger longer than it should. and Sarah couldn't deny the way her heart would flutter when his hand brushed against hers. One rainy evening she found herself at Mr. Carter's door with a plate of cookies that she had baked to distract herself. When Mr. Carter opened the door, his smile felt very warm to Sarah. "I just thought you might like something sweet," she said, feeling foolish. Mr. Carter invited her in. Soon they were sitting in front of the fireplace. In contrast to the cold outside, the atmosphere inside was warm. As always, they talked about everything and nothing. But that night felt different. They were both aware of the unspoken intimacy. As Sarah set her glass on the coffee table, their hands touched. Instead of pulling away, they froze. They looked into each other's eyes. Mr. Carter's gaze was curious and questioning. "You don't have to stay if you're uncomfortable," he said quietly. "I'm not uncomfortable," Sarah whispered, unable to stop herself. Mr. Carter slowly moved closer. Sarah didn't pull away. The distance between them dissolved and their lips met. It was slow and cautious at first, but quickly became more passionate. Sarah knew it was wrong. Every fibre of her being was screaming that this shouldn't be happening, but at that moment nothing else mattered. Only the feelings that Mr. Carter's touch was creating in her. The feeling of being seen, desired and alive. When the moment was over, they sat in silence. "Mr. Carter, I never wanted to complicate your life," Mr. Carter said softly. The following days were filled with guilt and longing. Mr. Carter and Sarah initially avoided each other, trying to pretend that it had never happened, but the silence had become unbearable. One evening, she found herself at the fence. Mr. Carter was already there, waiting for her. "Mr. Carter, I've been thinking about us," he said, "and I don't want to hurt you or your life." Sarah felt the same. "Me neither," she replied in a shaky voice. Mr. Carter briefly held Sarah's hand. "Then we move on. We forget that this ever happened." Forgetting wasn't as easy as saying the words. Months passed and life returned to normal, but the memory of that moment lingered. Some connections, no matter how fleeting, change a person forever. And so it was for Sarah and Mr. Carter. Their innocent neighbourly relationship had taken an unexpected turn and left a deep impression on both of their lives. The experience reminded Sarah that life was full of surprises and that some moments occurred as if by fate's design. No matter what, she would never forget that day, those moments. She would continue to live with it as a secret in her heart.